he forgets. It's power sports. And he was also the tuner for many a great racer from his racing research. And people have the jerseys. We have a couple of jerseys up here. I am sorry, I lost my jersey. Here we go, Greg Olson.
Oh, thanks. Hey, I did have the pleasure to work with a lot of people in this room. Unfortunately, you're wearing name tags, so now I can kind of figure out who's who. But you know, I was thinking, Pat and I a couple weeks ago, we got together and had a couple drinks, and just thinking about the sport back then, that if you think, if what I recall was correctly, I think it was late 60s, maybe 67, Edison Dye brought over Roger DeCoster and Joe Robert and Aki Janssen and Dave Bickers and Arnie Kring. I'm pretty impressed with myself that I remembered all. But at that time, I suppose Pat, I don't know, kindergarten, first grade, something like that, you know. And I know Sean, I believe, is gonna, he did a nice piece, as Sean has done on the website, on various racers and people from the industry, kind of documenting from the very early days with Pat. Pat and I were involved, you know, real strongly for about 3 years. And I think of it that motocross kind of just blew up after those Europeans came over here. And you think if that was the late 60s, and actually I kind of saw an aside to that, and it'll make sense in a minute, that Edison Dye also sent a guy, a 17-year-old guy named Mark Blackwell, to Sweden to train with the Husky team. And he entered Pat's life later on. But when we talked about it, I started remembering things like Startup, Puyallup, Motocross West. Startup was so cool. You know, Motocross West, we'd all climb on a ferry boat and go over there, you know, and even, you know, it got to be a pretty good group. There was one acknowledged leader of that. But we had such a good time, and it was like going and hanging out with your friends, and oh yeah, there happened to be a motorcycle race. It was a neat time. But when, you know, I'd heard that Pat was telling me the other day that in grade school he'd hear Billy Joyce fire up a motorcycle living quite a ways, and he'd just haul ass over there, you know, so he could watch him ride. And you knew he really loved the sport. When I had a little one-man shop called Racing Research, and I got hired by Bellevue Suzuki. And we'd done a lot of stuff in flat track, like Hannigan and Graham, Monroe. Not so much in motocross. I mean, there was customers that rode motocross, that rode scrambles, but we were kind of looking for, you know, a young, fast guy. And I can't really remember how it happened, to tell you the truth. I can't remember if we went and found Pat or if he came a knocking. It doesn't really matter. But as is documented on the website with Sean, it started out that he was going to get one bike and 10% off on parts. We went and watched him race, and it really wasn't my call. It was the guy that turned into free everything and 6 bikes. We ran 125, a 250, and an open bike. We'd run them for 6 months, we'd flip them, and we'd run 3 more. And we had a pretty good run together for 3 years, I'd say. When we, the thing that with Pat, that, not that he was the only one, but there'd be occasional spats, you know, you're banging bars or whatever, but I don't know anybody that as a person disliked Pat. I can't remember one person from that time that said, now maybe there's a bunch of you in here and I just didn't know, oh, there's one. By a show of hands, no. So, but I know, so we got hooked up and started racing, and we're building some stuff, and it ran pretty good. But the thing that I remember, one race, I remember a few of them, but one that really sticks in my mind. We were at Washougal, and we had a guy named Mitch Simmons riding some of our other stuff. Now, Mitch could break a cannonball. He's a big guy, he's strong. He reminds me of Randy Skyver, one of last year's inductees, that they could be in the midst of a crash and they just either didn't know they were crashing or they just wouldn't accept that. And they just put the motorcycle back on its wheels and off they'd go. Well, Mitch was kind of like that. We were down at Washougal, and here he had Pat. He's kind of the younger guy. He had Mitch and Rick McCaffrey and Binkley, and a bunch of guys that were a little older, you know, Buck Murphy. I mean, names that I leave out, I apologize. There was a ton of people. But they're running. Mitch and Pat just check out. They are gone. Well, there was still a race to be won between two guys. Pat rides back to the pit. How do you break the steering head off of an RM motocrossing? It looked like the chopper Peter Fonda rode in Easy Rider. He rides back to the pits, you know, and we put a blanket over it, and I don't know, we were very protective of like if something broke, you know, you'd say, oh, it was an ignition problem. You wouldn't say, well, the rotor stopped spinning because the crank broke. You know, you just say it was an ignition problem. So Pat comes back with that bike, and I'm looking at it. Mitch comes back one lap later. The wheels look like two potato chips. He's coming back, and I'm looking at them, both of them, you know, they're both out. They were so far ahead, it was nuts. And what could you say? You couldn't tell them to slow down, but I'm thinking like, geez, you guys, this is gonna really get expensive. But they did that. There was lots of wins in 77 like that. And in 78, and I'll get my timeline a little messed up here, but in 78 we had a motorcycle that worked pretty good, a 125, and I remember going to a national with Pat in San Diego, Trabuco Canyon. And boy, we had a high buck race team. It was Pat's Ford Courier with two 125s and all the crap we could throw in the back, you know. And I don't know if I didn't really let on with Pat, I don't think. At least I tried to be cool about it, you know. I remember there was some delay getting up to the track. And I was really nervous, you know, but I didn't want him to get nervous, so I didn't say anything. I kind of felt like we were jumping in the deep end of the pool there. But he did real well. He did good at a number of the races we went to, you know, but I don't know, it was, as he went on, kind of changed my notes here. Sometimes I work at Enumclaw, like Sean said, and sometimes people will come in and they'll start talking about a race here or there, you know, and we start talking, and I always think of SIR, where Pat would go out there, he'd run 6 motos, he'd run practice and 6 25-minute motos, he'd win them all. In fact, we took a little heat for it, because I'd have a stopwatch and we'd try and have him run the last lap just as fast as he ran the second lap to build stamina. And I tell some of the kids at the store now, oh yeah, 6 practice and 6 25-minute motos, and he won them all. And they look at me like, yeah, the old guy's telling stories again, you know. But it was true, he was dominant.